Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for everyone who is joining this call today. Um, this study was commissioned by the New Mexico Department of Agriculture, and so special thanks to the Department of Agriculture for getting this project going. So, in the Healthy Soil Act is really what brought this about. And the goal of this study was to essentially find ways that we can increase the production and use of composting in the state of New Mexico. So this, for some of you, you might be seeing this. It's a redo of the presentation I gave last week in Santa Fe, but for those of you who are new to this presentation, you can find this report. Just type it into Google, and you should find it pretty right up there at the top of the search results. There are still some errors that are in this report. One of those is to maintain a healthy living room, and that should be living roots. So if you're trying to maintain healthy soil, have a good living room, but also make sure you have a healthy living root system. So what's covered in the report? We covered a lot, and so that's why it's quite a hefty read. But we looked at items such as your regulations in the state. We looked at some of the data coming in from registered facilities in the state and what kind of tonnages are going through various types of facilities, landfills, transfer stations, registered composting facilities. Typically, that data is coming from non-agricultural sources. So we'll kind of also touch on that agricultural waste and where there's sort of a lack of data. And so we have to do some other estimation to figure out how much waste exists on the agricultural side. We also looked at, programs both within the state. So we worked with a wonderful partner, Unity Resources, who is local to Santa Fe, to identify some good case studies that we could talk about for composting happening in the state. That included Soilutions, that included Reunity Resources, and small family vineyard, Les Gomes Vineyard in southwestern New Mexico. We also looked at some neighboring state programs, both that what occurs in terms of regulations. We also looked at some unique partnerships and strategies that might be implemented in the state of New Mexico to advance composting. So we cover quite a bit. We also looked at federal grant programs. Some of those may be less active now, but I do believe that the Swiffer grant is still alive, and there is a deadline for that again this coming December. So I don't need to spend too much time on this because I want to keep moving through, but compost application on our soil is incredibly important and useful. So studies back up what I'm pointing out here, but as we know, it increases the soil organic matter in your soil. So what's that going to do? It essentially is a sponge in your soil. It increases the amount of water holding capacity of our soils. It increases your nutrient content, not to the degree that a fertilizer would, but it does provide nutrients. It can slow the runoff of soils, so we can kind of retain soil on our fields. And then there's this benefit of increased biomass, both above and below ground, that can really start to sequester carbon in our soils and in our plant biomass. And so just delaying that the rate at which carbon goes into the atmosphere has an impact on our environment. And as we all hear, that we hear a lot about the benefits of composting, but there are drawbacks. There are reasons for why we need to have best management practices in composting, why we need to have regulation in composting. These two images I'm sharing with you to just hopefully show that, composting can have environmental impact. So this is leachate coming out of about a 3,000 cubic yard pile of material that has yet to be put onto an active composting pad. So this leachate is just streaming out of this pile. And if not controlled, this can affect our surface water. This can affect the streams. This liquid, this leachate, has a very high chemical oxygen demand, has very high biological oxygen demand, which strips water of its oxygen and kills wildlife. So we need these types of things in place to control for this type of issue. So let's move into our waste stream analysis. If you were to go onto the Resource Recovery Bureau, their website, you'll find that the data is current through 2015. So we submitted a public information request and received data from 2016 through 2023. And that allowed us to get a more recent view of what type of what's in the waste stream and how much is being diverted. So here's a chart to kind of give you a sense of the data that we received from Resource Recovery Bureau. I'm still trying to switch over from thinking about this as the Solid Waste Bureau. They recently changed their name, so apologies. Sometimes I might just say RRB. So this report, what we see is that only about 500,000 tons per year on average is diverted of the roughly 3 million tons of total waste. So there's clearly some opportunity there to get some more material diverted from that waste stream. And as you can see, that middle green bar is how much is divertible from that total waste stream. So a significant 84% chunk of that could be diverted versus the 16% currently diverted. One of the large segments of our waste stream is municipal solid waste. That's this big gray part of the pie. And what is in that? What is municipal solid waste? Well, it's pretty much your trash. It's your garbage that goes out. If you don't have curbside recycling, if you don't have curbside green waste recycling, think of that composition of what's coming out of your home and going into the trash can. That's what's in MSW. And it can kind of appear to be just this nebulous thing. Like, what is it? Well, typically what's done is we do a waste characterization study, and that helps us understand more specifically what is in MSW. I believe, Charlene, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but NMED is currently working on putting together a waste characterization study through a Swiffer grant that will hopefully shed a little bit of light on what is in that MSW. Because at the time of this study, we didn't have that, we used an EPA study that was conducted in 2018 to look at what's in that MSW. And so because of that national average and applying that to New Mexico's waste stream, there's likely some nuances that aren't being caught here, right? So your climate is not the same as average United States, right? So the I think the importance of having a true waste characterization in the state that's looking very specifically at your MSW, how much yard waste is in there, would be really helpful for fine tuning your programs. So through this study, what we're estimating is that there's 970,000 tons of organic waste in your MSW. Right. So of the 1.5 million tons worth of total MSW, a large portion of that is potentially compostable. Furthermore, what we found from that is that I believe it's roughly 51% of the organic fraction of that MSW is generated in your, in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, in those larger metropolitan areas. So, finally, to wrap things up here, what we saw in the data is that on-site composting has increased significantly from 2016 to 2023. But off-site composting has gone down. So this is the transfer of material to be composted. So the good trend is we see compost increasing on-site. Well, so now let's look at agricultural waste. So this would be, that untracked side of the waste stream. These are still resources, and but it's not really tracked by NMED because it falls somewhat outside of their purview. We essentially looked at two major sectors of New Mexico agriculture. So that being dairy, and the second being pecans. So dairy cows, you have roughly 250,000 cows in the state, and determining how much manure is generated each day by a dairy cow was important. Again, due to the climate in the state, we wanted to really understand, is there less generation of manure per cow given drier feedstocks, less water, other environmental considerations that might make it perhaps cows are a little bit lighter weight. And so we rounded that up, talked to a number of different professors, both locally in the state and also at the University of Wisconsin, who did some research with NMSU, and found that this figure of 6.3 to 6.8 million tons of manure is generated annually. So that's a pretty large number, given that, yeah, it's just a large number. Then we have pecan waste. So this was another very interesting part of the economy to study and research. And you've got 50,000 acres of pecans in the state. It's a huge economic engine. And there's quite a bit of waste, right? There's quite a bit of, I wouldn't call it, it's obviously not a true waste, but it's clippings, trimmings, leaves, pecan shells. So in total, we estimate that there's about 250,000 tons worth of this material generated annually. Typically, what's done with the prunings is that it is just directly applied to the floor of the orchards to mulch the orchard. But some studies conducted by NMSU looked at co-composting pecan trimmings with manure. In some cases, that might make sense where those can be co-located nearby. But in other situations, if there's not a dairy close enough to a pecan grove, then it's not really going to be financially feasible. We did also find an example of this being done in southern Arizona, where I believe it's Green Valley Pecan is composting and producing about 30,000 tons worth of compost that they use on their orchards. We also researched the composting, registered compost facilities in the state and types of programs in the state. So the majority of the compost facilities in the state are municipal biosolids compost production operations.
Erik, we lost your slides. Can you maybe go back and see if you can? That's there. There it is. That's better. Thank you.
Okay, so you see the agricultural waste when I go to this one. Do you see it?
That's right. Now we're good. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry. Don't know why that happened. So we have about 56 registered composting facilities. Most of those are, biosolids production. This image is an example of what biosolids composting can look like. It's a sludge material that's mixed, blended with, in this case, walnut tree grindings to, bulk up the material and allow for air to flow through that material. So you also have about 6 meat processing facilities in the state. So we spoke with one of those. Examples of that would be Lee Dixon in northeastern New Mexico, where he does not have really a good option where he can send his meat processing waste. It's called offal. And so this type of offal is considered special waste. If it's not managed via composting, it's considered special waste and needs to be disposed of at a facility that is approved to receive special waste. So in his situation, it's more economical for him to compost all of his butchery waste on site. And here it was a great example where he partnered with the city of Raton to take green waste that was received at the landfill. That material is ground up into wood chips, and he blends that with his butchery waste to create a compost product that he then land applies to his pastures for his grass-fed beef. So a great example of what a meat processing facility can do. Then we have some other facilities that are not operational. So I think an update to that would be helpful to really understand like who's actually still processing in the state, who's doing it. Food waste composting, we found that there are not as many programs doing that. So northwestern New Mexico, we have AMF. They are doing composting. They got started by working with their local school district, Farmington School District. And then we have Payne's Organic Soil Yard, Reunity Resources, as we already mentioned, they were partners on the study. And then Soillutions, who I don't know if any of you got to speak with them last week, but have some really exciting new food scrap diversion programs that they're doing with area businesses in Albuquerque. So, looking at composting capacity, essentially what we did was look at the total number of facilities, estimated capacity that those have, and use that as a benchmark. Then to understand, well, how much compost is produced by that, we went to very handy text. I don't know if I have it close by, but about a 900-page book on composting that really describes how much reduction in volume do you get, how much reduction in mass do you have during the composting process to come out to this kind of 50,000 to 90,000 tons of compost being produced annually. Again, there's no data for this, so we had to do some estimates, and it could be, that's why there's such a wide range, and there could be more. There could be more compost being produced than this. We don't have a lot of data on that. And then I just included that little tidbit there of, what kind of capacity increase would be needed to handle potentially 970,000 tons of organics, which would be a lot, 323% increase. So Reunity Resources, they also looked into the barriers to compost production. Some of the things that we found were, zoning could be a barrier. What we advise, however, is that, if you're going to launch a composting operation, that you really do due diligence, look into the correct zoning, and determine where the appropriate type of land is for this practice. But it's easy, much easier said than done. There can be quite a few competing interests for this type of land. So typically it's industrial, or it's a heavy industrial site. Composting generally isn't a high income, high revenue generating type of operation. So there could be other more well capitalized businesses looking for that same type of land. So there can be some, it's a competitive process. And then in rural compost production, things like poverty, already a culture of illegal dumping that occurs across the board, whether that's urban or rural. But there's other higher needs, such as, I think one of my contacts mentioned some communities don't have running water, right? So there are competing needs that trying to encourage or enforce diversion of organics is just going to be a tough lift. Landfill, the cost of landfilling is also pretty low. So you're competing against the tipping fee for landfills. So we worked with Sunny 505 based out of Albuquerque, and they examined and had a look at education and outreach in New Mexico, and found that there's not a cohesive statewide program focused just on the diversion of organics and the use of compost. Their takeaway from that is the state could benefit from having additional resources put into a statewide campaign. So now I want to get into some of the neighboring states, what we found and uncovered through this research. And one great example that I wanted to point to was this program that was started at the University of Arizona in Tucson, that being the Compost Cats. This program started just on campus and has expanded to also become a partnership with the city of Tucson and their food cycle program. They are composting now on, they have large windrows. It's a commercial operation. So this is a great sort of example of, what could be done where you have perhaps your larger universities located near urban areas. Another great example is Denali We Care in their compost facility in Phoenix at the 27th Street composting facility. This was bid out in 2014 and went live, I believe, in 2017. It's a 27-acre compost facility receiving organics from commercial and some residential locations in the city. So it's a partnership where the city invested in the development of the facility, and then they subcontract, or they bid it out for the operational component to Denali We Care. So in the future, if Denali We Care has, I believe, a 5-year contract with several options to extend. This is a good example that I could see Albuquerque potentially partnering with a composting facility and getting something going. On the agricultural side, again, I mentioned the Green Valley pecan. So this is, again, 30,000 tons worth of compost being produced, co-composting pecan trimmings and dairy, and that material being used on their orchards. Another item that we touched on in the study is the Texas Field of Dreams. And essentially what was happening is that there was a high phosphorus content entering the water stream from dairies. So a composting program was put in to help deal with roughly 7,000 cubic yards of dairy manure and get that material composted and applied onto athletic fields. So this was an effort to find a home for manure that didn't otherwise have a place to go. And through this study, it was found that essentially by blending compost with sand and applying that onto these athletic fields, there was a reduction in irrigation needs, and that extent both the quality of this grass was much more playable, but in conditions where there's drought, you actually had fields that were able to survive through the drought versus being totally unable to be played on. So let's move on to other examples of what's going on in other states. So we have compost use in neighboring SB 1383 procurement. So this is what's being used in California to promote the use of compost. So essentially, when we passed this law that targeted 75% diversion of organics, what was built into that was some means to drive the market side, drive the demand side for compost, because we knew we would have supply. So if this law is in place to drive supply, we needed to find a way to get it sold. So this procurement law was built based on the number of people in a jurisdiction. So let's say in a county, maybe you have 10,000 people in that county. Annually, 0.08 tons worth of material needs to be purchased per capita So that's an example of a procurement law. Another example would be a water efficient landscape ordinance, and that's done in a way to it's put into zoning laws where any new development over a certain number of square feet, the landscape is required to use a certain amount of compost product. So that's another example of a procurement. NRDC has a great model compost procurement policy that can be reviewed and drafted to meet the needs of a local jurisdiction. Federal programs. So there are some financial assistance programs through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. These programs can help reduce the cost to purchase compost and use on eligible soils. The first step would be to meet with soil, I'm forgetting the name, but from someone from the NRCS who can go out, look at your soil, determine how what your current nutrient take is on that soil, what's your profile, and how much should be applied to meet agronomic rates. And so there are funding tables that are available where you can look at how much financial assistance is available per cubic yard of compost applied to your fields. So that's potentially an opportunity for larger scale compost producers who have a fairly low per cubic yard price range. And then we have, the Swiffer grant, which I mentioned, is ongoing. Some of these other grants, I believe, have closed, and I don't believe have a future right now, although depending on changes in the administration, that might change. Okay, so let's get into some of the recommendations. It's truly a balance of looking at both supply and demand side. So you have production of compost, right, and you have the use. And ideally, we see strategies put in place that help both. I think from what I have learned in working in the industry is that we can't just put in policy or promote programs that are heavy on one side. We have to focus on both sides. The market is really what drives successful composting operations, demand for composting. So as we think about that, the use, the production, education is required for both of those sides. But I think on the use side, we really need to see a push towards education, a push towards seeing the benefits, and those will vary depending on the type of use, depending on the type of, whether it's a landscaper in an urban setting or a university in a more, campus setting versus an agricultural setting. So education is going to be really important, and tailored education depending on who is receiving the compost and who you're trying to pull to draw in to make the switch. Diversion programs, clearly, there are some existing brush diversion programs that are happening, seasonal brush diversion. Last week after the conference, got to go out to Western New Mexico and see a couple sites where diversion happens. It's already being done. So we just need to kind of take that and keep going with it. So from that perspective, what I would recommend is, if you're going trying to say this in a polite way. So food waste diversion is very challenging. In California, it is can be a nightmare. There's a ton of contamination. So my advice is to stay clear of food waste to start. Build a successful composting program based on what's working, and that is yard waste out of your urban communities. It's going to be the cleanest material to start with. Get that going, and then identify your cleanest sources of food, of truly spoiled food that can't be fed to others, and get that material. In some cases, you're going to need it, right? Because you need to get your carbon to nitrogen balance correct. You need your moisture content to be in the right range. So you're going to need that water-rich food waste source. But to the extent possible, begin with yard waste. So that's where I feel that municipalities are best served to look at, that type of material. As mentioned here, and I'm going to continuously point to California, but we have a tax incentive where there's no sales tax on the purchase of equipment that is used for recycling, for composting. So there are some ways, if there's no grant money available, is there a way we can at least provide a kickback to those working in the industry by not charging tax? But beyond that, there's clearly a need, aside from Soillutions, who has a true windrow turner and now depackaging equipment, there are a few composting operations in the state that have dedicated compost-specific equipment. So we need to change that if we want to see these facilities able to expand and take on more material. On the use side, again, adopting those ordinances, like I mentioned, some procurement laws can help get more compost on the ground. And it's beyond just, the benefits are there. It's actually going to help these landscapes absorb and retain more water. And then we had a couple regulations related recommendations that would ideally help those in the agricultural sector feel more confident that they can do on-site composting without being registered. Okay, so I added in some slides here that differ from last week, but these are really just looking at some of my thoughts on this. And I think, we really need to promote the benefits of composting. We've seen that composted mulch on burn scars can both reduce erosion, but it's also less flammable. It's also more in demand for roadside types of projects. So I think educating our customer base, or on what the benefits are, is incredibly important. It goes beyond some, the environmental benefits. As mentioned in the plan, we touched on this, that the governor has a 50-year water action plan. Maybe this is not a possible stream of funding, but again, there's a lot of discussion in this plan about preserving the water quality, about reducing and conserving water that we do get, and compost application. Compost can absorb and hold 4 times its weight with water. So there's a huge benefit there that we should be educating folks that are putting together these types of plans and making sure that they're aware that composting should be a tool, in this toolbox. So, again, here's an example based out of California where we had a pretty large fire, and to reduce some of the toxins that went into the streams, compost socks. So filter socks that are typically used with straw wattles, those were filled with compost and put around drainage inlets. And then that was studied and found that the uptake of toxins into that compost mixture was far greater than what you would find with a typical straw wattle. So here's a great use for fire-ravaged lands, especially in that wild urban interface where you have potentially a higher toxin load from homes or commercial establishments being consumed in fire. So all those toxins, that's a lot. That ideally, if we're using compost socks, we can reduce some of that discharge into the streams. Then again, looking at composted mulch, some studies were done with the University of Nevada that found that composted mulch, so the woody material that is screened out of the final compost product, is far less flammable than a whole host of other mulch options. So if you're considering a fire-wise landscaping plan around your home, consider this, composted wood chips as a product that could protect your home from catching on fire, right? Just very important decisions that we have to make that we need to be educated on and need to be aware of. All right, so that was a bit longer than I thought, but I hope this was helpful. And there's my true last slide, but I appreciate it. I hope I didn't bore you all.
Not at all. Thank you, Erik. Thank you so much. I will stop the recording.